Hello, lovelies. Got a weird one for you today in numerous ways. This is Deliria by Phil Brucato, who you might remember as a White Wolf alumnus, best known for Mage the Ascension 2nd edition, which was objectively the best version of Mage that we had before they fucked it all up. I used to like him. He got a bit aggressive and antsy, like a lot of other people did in the 2010s. But I used to like him, like his work, certainly. And I really desperately wanted to like this when it came out. But I think we only ever played it once, which means technically it's not going to be part of my Grim Game project. But this game feels like a game out of time, even more so than much older games, like say the D&D Back Me or a lot of these older games. This feels much more lost and out of time. I guess that is the problem when you set something in the here and now, because the here and now has already moved on by the time you actually hit publication, and this only compounds, especially when you tie in a lot of your ideas to information technology and so on. So apparently this came with a CD-ROM. Remember CDs?
I remember.
But I don't remember ever having the CD. I don't think it was... See, there was an early printing, and I think I must have picked this up at a convention. And the early printed versions didn't have the CD-ROM, apparently. Looking at it now, the idea of having a CD-ROM packed with your game seems weird. The paper case is in here, stuck between two pages. But the CD is not. But these days, obviously, that would be some sort of online thing or an app. Don't do this. Particularly don't do what Deliria did. Don't do what Deliria did. Because a lot of the rules appendices and some more complete descriptions and some additional material was on the CD-ROM. So if you didn't have the CD-ROM, you don't have that material, and now years later it's impossible to find, and that is the problem with the internet, which is supposed to be forever, but if something isn't popular or big enough, then it's not going to be forever, and that is the case here. This game was always going to be something in the shadow of Changeling the Dreaming, White Wolf's effort in 95, I think the first edition was. Reading back through this, I still find myself wanting to like it more than I do, especially when I reflect upon how unimaginative and unambitious a lot of today's games are. And at the time, this would have been a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways, but it's also deeply frustrating. This is a somewhat pretentious, somewhat unrestrained book. It is full of purple prose and superfluous fiction. It's very much an example of an early story game, a sort of missing link, you might say, between White Wolf's here's how you play it approach to story gaming and later story games that completely got rid of all rules and all permutations and stripped things down possibly too far, and it's a bit of an ungainly beast as a result. It is a crocoduck in evolutionary terms, which is obviously is a creationist foil, but yeah, it's an awkward intermediary between the two. What dates it so thoroughly, besides the CD-ROM, is that it is full of internet idealism, unrealized ideas about virtual reality, optimistic visions of how the internet would break down barriers of identity, nationalism, the ways in which people would categorize each other, the erosion of borders between identities so that people could eventually be freer, more able to be their authentic, true individual selves. Instead, of course, what we've discovered, particularly through social media, is that identity politics would eventually pervert this vision of breaking down barriers to just create even more barriers and to create much more granular division between people. So it's kind of heartbreaking to look back on this and the idealism and the way the old internet used to be, and then to realise how far we've strayed from the more positive spin that was present here. There is a prescient moment in one of the bits of fiction, which I normally try to avoid reading, but in it there is a guy who is very definitely in the text putting on the sensitive, new age, feminist dude routine to try and get a slightly insane hippie chick into bed. And we all know how all that worked out, of course. It has all the weaknesses and problems of White Wolf books dialed up to 11. Important stuff is hidden in the text, hidden in the fiction. It's pretty, but it's hard to read with odd spacing. It's full color and art filled, but there are great big chonky lumps of text, and some of the art is bad early CG art, which doesn't look good. There's tons of lore and arcane terms. It hits you with a glossary and so on, but it never really fully defines itself. A lot of it is mushy. Some of it is definitive, but we'll be here all day if I go through all of it. But the basics are that a place, something like faerie, exists. It's a dreamlike quasi-mindscape, an alternative dimension next door to ours, and things bleed back and forth into and from that world. Now, weirdly, there's a lot of guidance on what you're supposed to do in the game Deliria, but it doesn't really punch through to becoming what the game is actually about. There's all this guidance, but you never really get a handle on, okay, so what am I supposed to do in this game? You're supposed to be a fairy tale hero, but in the modern world, but you're a normal person who has been touched by Deliria, so you're a fairy tale hero, so you should follow a fairy tale storytelling style, maybe, but can you do that with what's presented? I mean, sure, you can impose a story, but that doesn't really feel like what this game is about. So despite the fact that there is an awful lot of advice on how to do things, what to do, perhaps, you come away without any clear idea of exactly what you're supposed to do when you sit down at the table. Similarly, the rules system is a little bit mushy. It's got multiple levels to it, so you've got sort of basic, intermediate, and advanced ways you can interpret the rules, which basically runs the gamut from just make it up to a slightly more complex set of rules. The way it works basically is that you set a difficulty and you test your prowess against that difficulty, which is a combination of two different qualities on your character. So it's pretty normal, basic way in which the majority of role-playing games work. When you take a chance, you draw a card from a slightly altered deck and you add the result to your prowess, check that against the difficulty, which is usually in multiples of 3, and either you succeed or you don't. Black cards tend to subtract or mean something bad. Black face cards are usually some sort of failure, disaster, or a 0. Red cards add. Face red cards are some sort of critical success, automatic success, or bonus. Dice are a little bit more complex and non-intuitive. You roll 1d10 that represents the suits of the cards and another for number. Missed opportunity here to use tarot cards, honestly. On your first d10, 1 to 4 means it's bad luck, same as a black card. 5 to 8 means it's good luck, same as a red card. And 9 or 10 means something special happens, which basically means the same as one of the face cards. Yeah, so challenge levels, difficulties in steps of 3, not unlike the cipher system in some ways, and certain things can make things more difficult by a step or less difficult by a step. So there's a bunch of extra guidance on what you can do, what you're capable of at each difficulty level. It's a bit of a holdover from the White Wolf days, I think. Despite eschewing and poo-pooing combat and saying that's not what the game is about, there's a somewhat complex set of combat rules. More margin of success means more damage, basically, with damage reducing your vitality, which is a sort of health and will to live until you die. You can be wounded at various levels through that. There are rules for social and spiritual combat too, which I guess is at least a complete game system, but if you're eschewing combat and the rules therein for that, it seems odd to be spending so much time on social combat and spiritual combat. You don't even get to create a character until chapter 6, which means with all this previous content you had no real idea of what sort of stats a character might have, what they might be capable of, while you went over all the rules, and a bunch of stuff goes unexplained until you get to the character creation rules. Characters are created using points in a manner similar to White Wolf stuff again. You have graces, mind, body and spirit, each of which has various aspects which you can divide your points differently into. You have hearts, which are pools, Deliria, fortune and vitality. You have vocations, which are skills, which can be further broken down into sub-skills as well. You have favors, which are magical practices, legacies, which are magical powers, and weirds, which are drawbacks and liabilities and curses and things like that. But even so, you will come out the other end of character creation with still having no real idea what you're particularly supposed to do in this game. It feels like sort of Ren Fair wish fulfillment in a lot of ways, and a lot of self-insertion by new agey hippie types. And like I say, I really wanted to like this game. I wanted to like it at the time, and I want to like it now looking back on it, because so much of what we see in games publishing these days is dull, unambitious, doesn't take risks in presentation or content, certainly in the mainstream and certainly in the sort of tag-along stuff that you see for 5th edition in particular. And at least this game is ambitious, and it has ideas, and it wants to try different ways of doing things in roleplay, and then it just face plants hard, because you, despite reading it all, you still have no real idea what am I supposed to do in this game, and that kills it. I think that, and the way in which it is structured and laid out, and the fact that it's so much a game of its time, it could definitely use some sort of update. For all I know, there has been a Kickstarter and a new edition. That tends to happen with things in my older books. But if it did, I think it would be greatly advantaged by having a much greater and stronger idea of just what the fuck it is you're supposed to do in this game, what the opposition you're facing is, and how it works, what its goals are, or all of that kind of thing. As it is, this is all a lot of advice around a central conceit or concept that is never spelled out. And it's funny to see that we didn't know back in 2003 that colour character sheets basically don't work, and we still haven't learned that lesson. Alright, so like I say, I wanted to like this. I still want to like this, but I just don't. It's too vague and wishy-washy. It just doesn't work. In terms of style, apart from a couple of clangers, the artwork and the presentation is pretty good. The way the text is laid out doesn't live up to the hype of the artwork, so that's unfortunate. I would give it a high 3 or a low 4 for style. Let's be generous because I wanted to see games take risks, so let's say a low 4 for style. In terms of substance, there's a lot of stuff in here, but it's waffle and nonsense that exists without a central plank around which to have all of that. There's a lot of kind of generic storytelling advice and so on that might be useful to a novelist or you might be able to transfer to other games, but as an object in and of itself, it's just, despite being, you know, many pages, hardback, full colour, it's ephemera. It's like having a big sack full of candy floss, right? Spill some water on it and you suddenly have a couple of sugar cubes worth of candy, and that's all that's really there, and that is the problem here. So substance 2, and that's being generous because I can see how you could use it elsewhere. So that's 6 out of 10, 3 out of 5 average. I would probably, as anything other than a curiosity or something to tap into for running other games, you could drop it a point to 2 out of 5. So it's an interesting curiosity, but it does at least represent a spirit of adventure and trying different things in gaming that seems to have been lost along the way, because even games that market themselves as being something different or story gaming or so on, like Powered by the Apocalypse, there's so much derivative mush, and the original stuff just isn't really role-playing. This at least is a role-playing game, albeit not a terribly good one with any idea of what you're actually supposed to do with it, and that's the problem. Zang. About 3,000 of you subscribe, but only about 200 are getting notifications, so click the bell and click all.